Welcome everyone. Welcome. Tap the screen, share the live. We're going to get started here. All right, so today's topic, we're going to be talking about a failure to communicate. Um, so a lot of unhappiness gets created when we do not communicate in a proper way, and so it ends up causing a whole bunch of problems that we just could reduce the time that we're dealing with things if we communicate clearly and concisely. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. So, if you're just joining me, this is your first time, my name is Tina. I'm a happiness coach and I help people deal with the emotional side of change. And so that can be any change, whether that's personal or professional. So, today, like I said, what we have here is a failure to communicate. Have you ever been in a situation where you're like, but I friggin' told them and they don't listen, and what's going on? And you get frustrated, you get annoyed, you get angry, you get irritated, maybe you yell, and your point is not coming across clearly. So what we want to do is the first thing that we're going to focus on is understanding clearly what it is that we want to communicate. We need to focus on what is the outcome that we're hoping to achieve by communicating whatever it is that we're trying to communicate. What is the goal? What is the purpose? And for us to be really clear about what it is that we are trying to communicate. So maybe that's a new process or a procedure. Maybe that's you want somebody to pick up the slack around the chores around the house. Maybe it's your kids aren't listening to you. Maybe it's something else about how you're feeling. So the first part is understanding for yourself what it is that you're trying to communicate and what it is that you want as the outcome of the communication. So the more clear we are about the outcome and the goal of the communication, the better we're able to articulate what it is that we want to say to someone else. The next piece that we have to understand is, why is this important? And why are we communicating it? And if we didn't communicate it, what would happen? What would be the consequences of that, and really understanding the why behind the communication. Also, is this the first time that it's been communicated, or have you communicated this message in multiple formats, in multiple ways? So that will determine, so for instance, say you've got a new process at work, and it's one thing that you maybe do a meeting, you roll out the communication with everybody involved, you've given documented notes, and you're like, okay, we're good, everybody's been informed. And then they don't do it. And you're left frustrated, annoyed. Maybe people don't hear the message in the way that you communicate it as well. So why are we communicating? What is the goal that we're trying to the outcome of the communication? The next thing is to understand who we are communicating with. And so we need to be able to tailor our communication style to the people that are receiving the communication. Because if we communicate a message, but the other person doesn't end up understanding the message, then you can talk until you're blue in the face and nothing's going to change. They're not going to be able to receive the message. So you need to be able to communicate with other people in a way that they're going to understand the message. So in order to do that, you need to be able to understand who it is you're communicating, what level of their knowledge or background is on the subject matter that you're trying to communicate. One of the things that often happens as leaders, we assume that other people know what it is that we know, and whether we're leaders or not, maybe just, because we all see things from our own perspective, our own experiences, and if that other person has not had those experiences, they are not going to see things in the same way that you do. And so it's important to really understand who is it that you're communicating with and what their experience level is with the subject matter that you're trying to communicate. Is this the first time that you've talked about it? If it is, then that's a whole different style of communication. You want to try and do a written, verbal, and some sort of visual presentation is also good, so that they have at least two different learning methods to be able to receive that communication. If you know the person's style of communication style, so for example, if say you're in sales and you can never get this person on the phone, but if you text them, they respond immediately. So communicate with them in a way that is conducive to the way that they want to be communicated with. So, and that would depend on certain things. So in a work situation, a lot of times I preferred email communications because usually I had a lot of meetings booked up and there were certain things, and then I would have a blocked out time from when I would look at emails. So email communication was usually good because there were so many distractions going on through the day. Text messages, if it's something short and sweet, if it's a phone call, if it's a long, complicated situation where you need a little bit of back and forth, or if you have a question that you're going to ask, and then depending on their answer, you may have additional follow-up questions. So that is usually better to have a phone communication style. So understanding who you're communicating with, how they like to be communicated with, and thank you. And so making sure that you're understanding their perspective. Because if they don't receive the message, then the change that you're communicating, usually the reason we communicate is we want some sort of change, or we're informing or updating somebody of something that's important that they need to know. And that also leads to another piece of communication, is that when we are communicating, if we know the what of what we're communicating and why we're communicating it. So maybe, and I know women, we tend to do this, we like to process. We'll talk everything out, and we'll come up with a few different problems, and maybe we're telling this to our partner and they try to jump in and fix things, and then you get upset because you don't feel like they were listening to you or being heard. And so those are things that can end up happening if you don't understand why you're communicating, what it is that you want from the communication, and then pay attention. Are you communicating with your girlfriends that you can just vent and blow off steam, or are you communicating with your spouse and you know that if you bring them a problem, they're going to try and fix it? So being able to state what it is that you're looking for an outcome helps make for happier communication. It's like, I just need to process this. Can I bounce some ideas off of it? And the who part is also respecting who it is that you're talking to, because do they have time for that communication? Do they have the bandwidth to be able to receive this? I tend to forget this a lot. I'm getting better at that, of being more aware of, can somebody else receive this information right now? Maybe they can't at the moment. Maybe they're in the middle of something else, or they got something else on their mind, or they just are tapped out and they don't have the bandwidth. That doesn't mean that they aren't receptive to the communication. It's a matter of understanding, is this the right timing for the communication? And then the fourth piece is talking about how we communicate. This often comes off, it's not what you say, it's how you say it that usually matters. And you can say something really sweet, really nice, word-wise, but if you say it in a flat tone or with a different inflection, it means something completely different. So being aware of these kind of things when you speak with somebody, of how you're communicating. And a lot of times, especially in a work environment, I would often, if it was complicated or it was something that I needed back and forth information, I would communicate verbally, and then I would follow up the communication with an email or some sort of text message. As we discussed, these are the things that we covered, just to confirm that we were on the same page. It's also a little bit of a CYA, cover your ass kind of thing, of making sure that somebody knows. And oftentimes I would also say, is there anything that I have missed in the communication? Because sometimes, depending on how long a meeting was or how long a conversation was, there may have been key details that were missed, or things that I thought were important maybe weren't as important to the other person, and they latched on to maybe say the first thing that you said, but they forgot the last thing, or vice versa, right? So paying attention to how you communicate, your tonality of what it is that you're communicating, and the method that you're communicating with. So sometimes it takes more than one time to be able to have somebody receive a message. Sometimes you have to talk about it multiple times, because maybe the first time they could only hear a certain piece, and maybe some emotions came up for them. Maybe they got defensive about it. Maybe they felt attacked by it. And we have to pay attention. Is the way that we're communicating causing the person to be more open and receptive to why it is that you're doing what you're doing? Or is it causing fear to come up, and they put up walls and defensiveness? So if you understand what your goal is, then you're going to pay attention to how you communicate a message, because if you communicate it in a way that brings up fear, it's going to bring up resistance. It's going to cause blocks. Now, if that's your goal, that's a different story. And we might need to have a different conversation about what that is about. But paying attention to how you communicate something, and whether or not you're creating resistance in your communication. So some things that can create resistance in your communication would be talking in a way that maybe you've got a very stern voice, very firm, and you're pissed off, you're not really hiding it very well. And even if you are, guess what? People can still pick up on the energy, even if you say it in the sweetest way. If they are sensing that you are frustrated and you are not happy with them, you can pretend to be as happy as you want. It's not going to come across the right way. So it is better to be authentic, saying, we're frustrated with this situation, and I know you're doing the best that you can in this particular thing. I feel frustrated. So this is where, as leaders, we take ownership for what it is that we are communicating, and we go first with how we're feeling. And when we do that, we drop the walls. It allows the other person to drop the walls, and then you have true communication back and forth, rather than a situation where you're talking at somebody and they're not actually receiving the message. The whole point of communication is for the other person, the other parties, to be able to receive and then act on the message. If we don't communicate in the right way, or if we trigger negative emotions in the other person, they're going to shut down, they're going to not listen, they're going to put up walls, and then it creates so much more wasted time, because then you're going back and forth, nobody's understanding, everybody has hurt feelings and all of these things. So this is why it's important when you go to communicate something, especially if it's important, then you need to be able to clearly understand what it is that you're trying to communicate and what is the goal and the outcome. The frequency of communication is also important. Like I said, if this is the first time something has been communicated to somebody, you're going to need to repeat it in multiple ways, in multiple formats, in order for the message to be fully received and reinforced. So this could be done in a way that it's in different methods. So a lot of times when we were doing culture changes at work, these are things that are not easily adapted to. These are styles of behaving, especially when there was an old way of behaving, and now you want a bunch of people, not just one person, a bunch of people to change over to a new way of behaving. And so the way that you introduce that will matter. And if you introduce it in a way that creates fear, you're creating resistance automatically. Because even if you communicate it in an effective way, it still can trigger fear in people because you don't know what their experience was before. Maybe they were treated badly if they spoke their truth. Maybe they were shut down when they tried to bring things up. Maybe they used to try to bring things forward and then it wasn't received. So then they kind of learn this victim mentality kind of thing where they just don't bother and they're like, oh, why bother? It's just the way it is and nothing changes. So this is important, especially if you're in business or even in personal relationships. But we're going to stick to business for right now on this one. When you are communicating, and it's been something that has happened multiple times before, whether that's a new system implementation and maybe the leadership has had a habit of saying, oh, this is going to be great, we're going to implement this and then everything's going to be perfect. And the last, 2 or 3 systems that were implemented, when people tried to raise concerns, they weren't heard, they weren't listened to, they weren't nothing, or maybe that they were told things were going to change and then they didn't. So you have a barrier of trust that you automatically have to start to overcome. You have to take that into account when you are doing communication, and it's a big change for them. Now for you, you might be thinking, well, this isn't a big deal, it's a small change. But again, this goes back to who are you communicating with? What is their experience? They are not going to think at the level that you are as a leader, because if they did, they would already be doing the things that you're wanting them to do. They do not think at that level. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't have to communicate some of these things. But because you do, then you also need to take into account who it is that you're talking to and how to communicate with them in an effective way. And do it in a way that reduces the likelihood that it's going to trigger a fear reaction, unless, of course, that's what you're looking for. And then that's a whole different ballgame. So those are 4 things that you can really focus on to help create happier communication. Because when you are communicating in a way where you understand what it is that you're trying to communicate and what the outcome is, why this is important both to you and to the person that you want it to change for them. They need to understand why it's important for that you're requesting this thing. And a lot of times that gets failed to be communicated, especially in a work environment, because what ends up happening is we think that you should just have, you be told what to do and then they just do it. And you know what? Sometimes there are situations where you don't have time to explain the why behind it. And if you've built up enough trust with the people that you're working with, hey Dan Obley, if you've built up enough trust with the person or the people that you're working with, then they will be able to execute on the command without knowing the why. And then you will be able to understand what it is that you'll be able to execute on the command, and then what you need to do afterwards is you need to come back around and explain what it is that the why behind what it is that you asked. Hey Dan, we're doing a live training here, so so you want to be able to make sure that you are communicating the why afterwards. So if you've told them a what and this is what I need you to do, they've gone and done it, making sure that you circle back about why that was important. So that helps reinforce trust, and it allows them to understand that they weren't just doing something just because, right? Because what that ends up doing is if you start creating that kind of environment where you are telling somebody what to do and you expect them just to do it, then what you are creating is you're creating an environment where they will only do things if you tell them. And you are not encouraging free or creative thinking. You're not creating people that want to solve problems. You're creating people that will only do exactly what they've been told, no more, no less. And sometimes you want that. Other times, if you're growing a big business or if you want somebody to develop the understanding, going back and explaining the why is going to be really beneficial. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck micromanaging, and then you'll be frustrated because people can't seem to do anything unless you're around to tell them. Now, if you want to set up a codependent relationship, that's a great way to do it, but you don't want that. If you have any intention of your company being efficient, effective, and being able to grow at scale, then you want to make sure that you are communicating in a way that explains to people the thought process behind why you have asked them to do what it is that you need them to do. And sometimes you can't always communicate that, but as much as you can, and reinforcing that behavior. So, yeah, that is the topic for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please comment, or you can follow my YouTube channel. And if you guys have been watching me this week, these are my free trainings that I'm doing. I do have a paid community that I'm creating, and that is going to be on school. And that is where we're going to have a topic like this, but instead of me just talking at you, we are going to actually have back and forth. So we'll introduce the topic. You guys can share your thoughts, your experiences with it, and then we can do a Q&A of different things, like if you have questions or you need guidance on certain things, then I will be able to help you with that. So if you're interested in that and you've stuck around this long to the end of the video, I appreciate you. Send me a message or comment, and I will give you the information for the paid group so that you can be part of a community where we're focused on creating a happier environment, whether that's your personal life or your professional life. Okay, so guys, with that, that is the training for today, and we will see you again tomorrow, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Take care. Bye.